Hello, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about leading constant movement. And what does that mean? We're going to look at how to transform chaos and crisis. John Kennedy, former president, once stated, when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One represents danger and the other opportunity. So this is how our discussion with crisis will be framed today. As we look to what we'll be discussing today, we must consider that healthcare workers should understand that they must be able and willing to confront the unexpected. There's always something that's changing or chaotic within an institution or clinical setting. And since the dawn of time, crisis has always been with us. So crisis is really normal. The leader needs to know how they perceive crisis. And when we're talking about crisis, it really boils down to what is occurring that needs to be changed. Something has happened and we have to change. It's not something like the building's on fire. We need to make a change. So crisis comes in all forms, from the major, like I said, the building's on fire, which is rare, but to the more common, which is internal and external influences are occurring that the institution or workers must change their practices, the way they're doing things. And just remember, the more complex the infrastructure or the institution is, the more interdependent the elements that make it up are. So there's a greater likelihood that change will be necessary because a crisis will probably occur. One of the things that creates a crisis, and we've probably all dealt with that at some time, is either the complexity of the institution or technology. And more than likely, it's been the technology in our situation. But using technology can help us in many ways. It expands our knowledge, it deepens our knowledge and understanding, and it just broadens what we know about how to care for people, new treatments that are occurring. It just helps us with providing overall patient care. So organizational and relation issues are highest on the priority list when we're exploring the internet, basically, is what that's talking about. So human organizations, basically healthcare institutions, must adapt to changing circumstances. We know that healthcare is something that's continually changing. And adaptation is critical to the organization's ability to continue to thrive and succeed. So they must be able to adapt to a change. And really, adaptation is a fundamental predictor of the continuing existence of any institution. Strong leadership requires a focus and planning for change activities that are going to occur in an organization. There must be organizational commitment and design for and looking at the effectiveness of processes. We have to be able to change processes when they're not working. Leaders need to understand the elements of a change process and understand what the dynamics of change are. Leaders must be able to communicate the change that's occurring. What are the characteristics of this particular change that's going to occur? So communication is key with any change and being able to adapt to that change. Everyone from the higher echelons of the institution organization to the lowest worker in the capacity in the institution must be informed and understand the change, why it's occurring, what is going to happen, and how we're going to know that the change occurred. Really, when we're doing change, it's the intersection of chaos and complexity. Chaos is something that we see that leads to a crisis. So there's something that's occurring that's going to create a crisis that's going to lead to a change. Remember the complexity of the organization and potentially the complexity of the change that must occur has to be looked at. So really, this intersection of chaos, complexity, and crisis is really where creativity can occur. And this notion that order is consistent with the adaptation. What this means is, can the change occur in an orderly fashion? It's probably not going to be perfect, as I've previously discussed, but can it be as orderly as we can plan, recognizing that it's not going to be perfect? So there's many different types of crisis management, and these are all discussed in your book. We're going to select a few of them to discuss here today, but I do recommend that you take out your book and have a good understanding of all of them. The team process is the partnership in our institutions, with them being healthcare oriented, is the expectations of the customer and the relationship with the team and their processes that they do. So the customer is always looking at, what have you done for me lately? How are you taking care of me? Are you doing a good job? Am I getting better? Am I going to go home able to participate in my activities that I did prior to coming to the hospital or clinic? And then the team has to look at both what's going on in the institution and marry that with the care that needs to be provided with the customer or patient. So that's relationship has to include the goals of the institution as well as the goals of the patient, the competence of the healthcare provider and the team around them, with the customers' expectations and their own resources and competence, work demands, workflows, and then always being outcome oriented. The person that we're taking care of is generally going to get better. They want to get better. There's always that person that comes to the hospital in the dying phase, but even that, we need the outcome to be as good as possible, where they kept safe, where they kept comfortable. So that's always the outcome oriented. Did the person came to the hospital and had surgery or an illness, did we help them to get better? When the environment affects the internal mechanisms of the organization, this creates a crisis, and then that demands change. So that's all that heading in your book is stating. The internal forces have a strong impact on our ability to change and the ability for the institution to thrive. Everyone has to be responsible to the environment, both internal environment and external, but the internal environment is constantly shifting as well as the external. And leaders have to be able to look at the internal forces and always be willing to adapt and reframe work responses. Is there a greater demand here today for work? Is there a lesser demand? Are we needing to, is the staff needing to know how to care for a different type of patient or new equipment? All of those things, they're constantly, the leaders should constantly be looking for a way to balance all of these activities. So in order for any institution must have a strong service core in order to provide the services that they intend to. And with the healthcare, we want to be able to take care of our patients. So the organization has to have a well-stated mission that's going to be internalized by everyone in that institution, and how that those activities within the institution are meeting that mission statement. So the leader must be able to embrace the mission, identify how individual work contributes to the mission, ensure that work outcomes meet the mission statement and the goals of the institution, and adjust any element within the mission at a internal focus that can meet the external environmental demands. A skilled leader recognizes environmental changes are always going to occur. And again, those can be internal or external, and they're always going to be part of how the work is conducted by any member of the healthcare team. An effective leader understands the internal work dynamics and relationships within the organization must perform at a high level of proficiency. How can we provide the best patient care possible within the resources that we have? Leaders have to be able to translate what the demand is and how, what action is going to be taken to meet that demand. Effective leaders are always assessing information and resources to help them understand and what's going on, and then be able to translate that to the workers so they understand. As much as we want to prepare for a rainy day, we have to prepare as best we can for a crisis to occur. We know that that's a natural occurrence, and at some time or another, it's going to occur. So we should be in always a state of change. And this just means that we need to plan as best we can to make that change, make it smooth, make it effective. So there's several stages to go through to see how effective the institution and the workers or healthcare providers can adapt to the change. So leaders must know that there should be a short-term refocusing of resources. Those can be anything from staff to equipment that's needed. So that can be the recovery stage, or we're trying to make a change. Then how adaptive was the institution, and what adjustments had to be related to the strategic overall operation of the institution, as well as the clinical services that are provided to the patients. And then always the system has to be evaluated for, is it a flexible and fluid organization that can change easily, or what are burdening that institution to deal with a crisis in an organized and easily changing environment. So in summary, some key points that I want to reiterate is that crisis is natural and it should be viewed as an opportunity. Communication is key. Leadership down. The leadership must be able to communicate to everyone, communicate the need for the change, why the change is occurring, and what's going to happen during the change, and how will we know when the change occurs. The leader must always be aware of internal and external forces that create crisis and therefore change. The institution must always be assessed for flexibility and fluidity to adapt to a crisis and therefore change. We always need to be looking for that rainy day preparedness so that we can meet crisis head on and make the necessary changes. Remember, it's going to occur. We just don't know when. And then be able to evaluate that indeed a change occurred and the crisis was resolved so that we can move on to the next crisis. I hope you learned something today, and I look forward to talking to you again.